There had never been this much police activity in or around the quiet little village tucked away in Central America. But that all changed when Zena, a retired police dog, caused a stir by refusing to stop barking at a seemingly random tree. At first, her owner didn't think much of it until he managed to crack open the tree's bark and saw what Zena had found. His heart dropped. Right away, he called the police, and before long, every available officer had shown up. The first officer to arrive just stood there in disbelief. He couldn't wrap his head around what he was seeing. How could something like this end up hidden inside a tree? And yet, somewhere deep down, he and the rest of the force had been waiting for something to happen. They just hadn't expected it to be this. Within 30 minutes, at least 20 officers had gathered, ready to start knocking on doors and asking everyone in the area what they knew. 2 forensic specialists also showed up shortly after. Their job was to dig into what exactly had been discovered. The scene was already unsettling, but what really made everyone pause were the clothes, especially the uniform. Still, the biggest question on everyone's mind was, why had Zena been so focused on that tree in the first place? What exactly did she find inside, and what made it serious enough to bring out this kind of response? John had first heard Zena's barking from a distance. She had darted off during their usual forest walk, which caught him off guard. She'd never done that before since he'd adopted her. He took off running in the direction of the noise, but a knot started to form in his stomach. Zena wasn't just any dog. She had police training. If she'd found something, it probably wasn't going to be good. He finally caught up with her near the edge of the forest. At first, he felt a wave of relief. Zena wasn't hurt, but that feeling didn't last long. Zena was frozen in place, staring directly at an odd-looking tree that sat just off from the others. She was barking nonstop, her focus locked in. For a second, John wondered if maybe she had just chased some animal. But that didn't sit right. Zena wasn't the type to get sidetracked like that, especially not after all her training. No, something else was definitely going on. John had never seen Zena so fired up. She was buzzing with energy, locked in on that tree like her life depended on it. But why? He walked around it, trying to figure out what she was sensing. At first glance, there was nothing obviously wrong. The only thing that stood out was that the tree looked completely dead. No leaves, no new growth. That didn't exactly raise red flags for John, but maybe it should have. Part of him wanted to just clip Zena's leash back on and head home, but something about the way she wouldn't let up tugged at his curiosity. The tree looked ancient, its branches bare and brittle. There was nothing in the tree, but maybe there was something inside. He leaned in and touched the bark. It felt thin, almost brittle. When he knocked on it, the sound came back hollow. Could Zena actually be onto something? He wasn't about to dig in with his hands, but just then he noticed a small house not far away. He tied Zena to a nearby tree and jogged over to the house, hoping someone might be home. The owner answered, and when John asked if he could borrow an axe, the man didn't even question it, just handed it over. When John returned, Zena was still glued to the same spot, barking like nothing had changed. She wasn't letting up. With a deep breath, John lifted the axe and started chopping. After a few strong swings, he could feel the bark starting to break. He kept at it, aiming carefully. Then suddenly, the blade hit something that didn't feel like wood. It was soft. Too soft. John paused, uneasy. What was he breaking into? He placed the axe back into the hole and gently widened the opening, peeling back the bark bit by bit. Then, with one solid tug, a large section gave way. And that's when he saw it. Zena's barking shot up to a new level, sharp and insistent. John stumbled back, dropping the axe in shock. He couldn't believe what he was looking at. Had he really just been hacking into this? There was no doubt now. This wasn't just some old tree. This needed to be reported immediately. He grabbed his phone and called the police. The first officer to get the call was skeptical. The whole thing sounded bizarre. An ex-police dog, a dead tree, and now some unbelievable discovery? It didn't sound real, still something in John's voice made him pause. Just in case it wasn't some prank or misunderstanding, he decided to go take a look. As more officers arrived at the scene, they quickly set up a perimeter and started guiding locals away from the area. John, still shaken by everything, was more than ready to head home. He'd answered every question they threw at him, and all he wanted now was to get away from whatever this had turned into. But Zena wasn't budging. She'd stopped barking, but her eyes hadn't moved from the spot where they'd uncovered the find. It made sense, really. Zena wasn't just any dog. She was trained for this. Normally, a discovery like this would be just the start of her work, not the end. But now, without her former handler giving commands, she didn't know what to do next. That's when John realized Zena needed someone she trusted to tell her it was okay to stop. So he made a call. Zena's old partner, Oliver, was now retired too, but the moment he heard what was going on, he didn't hesitate. He said he'd be there right away. And when he arrived, Zena instantly seemed to switch back into work mode. She sniffed around the tree for a few seconds, then suddenly turned and started walking toward another part of the clearing. Everyone stood still, eyes on her. She had picked up a scent. Zena's trail led her to a patch of dirt where faint tire marks were still visible in the mud. Some of the officers had already noticed the tracks, but now they had confirmation. Zena had locked onto something. Back at the tree, the forensic team was finally able to give an update. The news was strange, part comforting, part deeply unsettling. The good news, it wasn't a body. What John had hit with the axe was a life-sized, handmade doll. But what threw everyone off was what the doll was wearing, a real police uniform. It wasn't just any uniform either. The forensic team found a name badge, and that name was immediately recognized by several officers. It belonged to Corporal Mike. Mike had been a trusted part of the force for around 15 years. Solid, dependable, a cop people looked up to. But a few months back, everything changed. Without warning, Mike left the department. Then things got even stranger. His name and records disappeared from all the official systems. The truth eventually came out, but only among those in the know. Mike had been caught red-handed trying to photograph confidential documents from the evidence room. He was fired on the spot, and the state was preparing to press charges. But that never happened. The very next day, Mike vanished. No trace, no explanation. It was like he'd disappeared into thin air. Since the beginning, the police had tried to keep everything under wraps. They didn't want this strange case leaking out, so they kept the search effort small and quiet. For about a month, they looked quietly, but came up with nothing. Eventually, they stopped and turned their attention to other cases. No one really knew what Mike had seen in those confidential documents, or why he'd risk everything for them. But one person couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. Jerry, the first officer on the scene. Jerry couldn't let it go. The whole thing gnawed at him. He kept thinking about Mike, not just as a colleague, but as someone he considered a friend. He felt like he'd failed him somehow, and the guilt just sat heavy in his chest. He promised himself he wouldn't let this drop. He had to know what really happened. So he made the call. He asked his chief for permission to lead the investigation, but the answer caught him off guard. A firm no. The chief said it would be better to hand the case over to a different city's department to avoid any conflict of interest. Jerry didn't buy it. Why not use their knowledge and experience? Why shut them out? That answer only made Jerry more determined. If he wasn't allowed to investigate officially, he'd do it on his own. In the following days, Jerry quietly gathered everything he could on the tree discovery. The forensics team had found traces of Mike's DNA and fingerprints on the uniform and the doll. But there was something else too, another set of prints. Unfortunately, they didn't match anyone in the system. Most of the local residents interviewed after the discovery didn't have much to say. But there were two exceptions. John, of course, and the man who owned the house where John had borrowed the axe. He turned out to be important. That man was the only person around who actually had a clear view of the tree from his window. He said he hadn't seen anyone messing with it, but one thing had stuck in his memory. Early one morning, he'd heard a car speeding past his house. What was strange was that the car was coming from the direction of the tree, which didn't make sense, since the road ended there. It was a dead end. What would a car be doing back there at that hour? He hadn't caught the license plate, but he had seen the car clearly. A red Dodge SUV Hellcat. Not exactly a car you see every day. The color, the shape, it stuck in his mind. And it hit Jerry like a punch to the gut. He knew that car. Everyone at the station did. That was Mike's car, the same one he'd driven to work for years. For a while, it felt like the investigation had completely stalled. There were no new leads, and Jerry was starting to wonder if they'd ever get any closer to the truth. Still, he pushed ahead and issued a search warrant for Mike's car. It was a long shot, and no one on the team really expected it to lead anywhere. But then came the surprise. Just a week later, Jerry got a call from a fellow officer in the next town over. The two had worked together before, and the officer happened to know Mike from back in the day. He said he'd seen a red Dodge Hellcat SUV, Mike's car, pull into a garage. He recognized it immediately because of the unique stickers on the back. Jerry drove over as soon as he could, but when he pulled up to the house, he was stunned. The place was massive, far from what you'd expect for someone who'd been fired and supposedly off the grid. It was modern, spotless, and looked expensive. Jerry took a deep breath, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. A few moments later, the door swung open. It was Mike. He looked healthy, confident, and honestly, pretty happy. Before Jerry could say a word, Mike grinned wide and said, "Finally, somebody found me." "What took you so long?" Jerry was caught off guard. He'd barely known Mike when they were on the force together. They weren't close, but Mike acted like he'd been waiting for him specifically. Still confused, Jerry stepped inside, and that's when Mike started to explain. The whole thing, the doll, the uniform, the tree, had been part of a plan. A strange one, but a plan nonetheless. Mike said he'd set up the scene hoping it would catch the attention of someone from the force. He knew the chief wouldn't come looking, so he was counting on someone else, a lone officer who wouldn't let it go. That person, it turned out, was Jerry, and the reason for all of it? Mike wanted someone to hear the real story of why he was fired and what was really going on behind the scenes. Mike explained everything. While doing routine filing, he'd come across some hidden documents, papers that contained serious evidence against a well-known local millionaire, but before he could do anything with them, the chief caught him snapping photos. Mike was fired on the spot. It wasn't just about breaking protocol, the chief clearly wanted those documents buried. Later that same day, it all made sense. Mike found out the chief was being paid off by the millionaire, and the same offer was made to him. Stay quiet, take the money, and walk away. Mike took the offer, not because he wanted the cash, but because he needed time. He wasn't going to protect the millionaire, but he also knew he couldn't go after him directly without getting crushed. What he did want was to expose the chief. Jerry listened to the whole story, not sure what to make of it. It sounded unbelievable, but at the same time, it didn't. He'd never liked the chief much anyway, and deep down, something about the story felt true. It didn't take much to convince Jerry to act. He started quietly talking to other senior officers, sharing what he'd learned. Bit by bit, they started connecting the dots, and soon enough, they had enough backing to get the chief removed from his position. Mike got what he wanted. Justice, in a way, was finally served. But what came next, Jerry never saw coming. With the chief out, the department needed someone to step up. Someone steady, fair, and committed to doing things right. Without hesitation, the other officers rallied behind Jerry. They wanted him to be the next man in charge. And so a strange chain of events that began with an ex-police dog named Zena barking at an old tree ended with a corrupt chief being exposed, and a good, honest cop named Jerry stepping up to lead the department. Funny how life works sometimes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true, unbelievable tales. Thanks for watching.